It's pretty relaxed. I was pretty mellow. It wasn't that bad, but but I had no idea that you could just have, but I came from a house without cats too. So we never had litter boxes in general. And our dog was pretty well free roaming. We had a skunk, a pet skunk growing up.
Tell me about your skunk growing up. Was that in the DC area?
Yeah, it's the same zip code I live in now. 20008, Washington, D.C. I mean, I wouldn't call it the inner city, but it's the inner sort of bucolic inner suburbs. I would say it's DC proper, but it's rolling hills and trees. But we got the skunk from what I would call a pet store of ill repute that like to sell roadkill animals to
just wildlife
to children. Yeah, friendly beasties. And I should tell everybody to stop screaming at the top of my stairs. Hey, Michelle. Yeah. I'm doing a podcast. Okay. She's like, okay.
I mean, at this point, like she's probably used to it now.
I know. Well, since COVID, it's like I've been basically in my living room. So I had a studio that was part of a restaurant facility that got the whole thing got shut down. So I had to kind of move home, which is fine because all my kids have moved out mostly anyway. So except for Mabel, but anyways, yeah, I end up doing a lot of the stuff in my living room, which is like I say, it's a post-COVID reality. And I'm okay with it.
This is my living room / studio that I'm in right now, which is also where I do my work. So we're on the same page there.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the future. It's the present. Yeah. So anyways, yeah, DC, what we were talking about, skunks in DC. Yeah. I don't know where the skunk came from. It's illegal to get skunks at this point because I've thought about getting one here, like especially during COVID. I was like, oh, maybe we should get a skunk, because we were getting everything else. We had chickens and a little caracal type bird named Grumpy Monkey that my son got out of the window well and raised to adulthood, taught him how to eat, and then he flew away. Yeah, it was, but yeah, you can't get skunks anymore. It's just as well. They're great animals. They were really, his name was Chantilly, and it was totally docile, cuddly animal. I think they don't have predators per se,
Not around there. Foxes, coyotes, maybe. Probably.
No. We have foxes for sure. No, not even around. I don't think they just picked it up out of the street and sold it to a kid. I think they must have gotten it from somebody.
I just thought we were talking about natural predators.
Oh, natural skunks. Okay. Yeah.
Is a skunk named after the Big Bopper song?
I actually think it was named after Chantilly, Virginia, which was a place we used to pass on the way out to the country, out to the Front Royal, on their way to the Shenandoah River, to my aunt's cabin out there. That's what I think so, but it also just sounded fancy, had an air of like perfume and Frenchness.
In much the same way that the most famous skunk is also French.
Pepe Le Pew.
Yeah.
Mais oui.
Was it... You have to have the scent glands removed, I assume.
Right, yeah, totally. They still stink a little bit, but they don't stink too bad. Yeah, and they mostly stink with this descenting stuff that you drop on them every once in a while when they stink. I don't know, it's kind of musty. Mm-hmm. It's not horrible. It's not offensive, really. It's just a little funky. But, you got to come with the skunk's going to come with the funk.
I'm a fan of most animals, I would say, but my hesitation about a skunk is obviously, beyond the smell thing is they're basically badgers, aren't they?
They're really soft kitty cats, is what they feel. Oh, yeah, they're badgers. Yeah, but they behave like really soft kitty cats. They climb up on you and cuddle. They're not like ferrets that like run away and hide under the couch. They're much more relaxed. or at least Chantilly was.
You're essentially living on what sounds to be a small farm in the middle of the city. Is that fair?
Yeah, we've sort of gotten rid of everything since all the kids were home. I have 4 kids. All the kids were home, and for COVID, and we just got chickens, and it just was like this daily, like down on the farm. Let's learn how to make Ethiopian food. Let's do this. Let's do that. Like there is, it's just like smoke and mirrors. There is no danger here, people. So yeah. But as soon as everybody went back to their regular lives, I have 2 boys up where you are in New York, and then I've got one up in Newfoundland, and then my daughter's still living here. But as soon as they split, I was like, oh, I got to get rid of these fucking chickens. They're the worst. That's the worst animal. And so I gave them to a friend who has a farm out in the country. The grackle bird just taught itself how to fly away and flew away one day. It was just beautiful and sad. It's the same way. My dog passed away very quickly, but after 17 years. Thank you. So yeah, and then we lost a cat too. So we're down after all that. We're down to just my wife and I and my daughter and 2 cats. So it's no longer a what would you call it?
Menagerie?
Yes, that's the word I was looking for.
It was that or ark.
Exactly. It's neither. It's pretty damn quiet is what it is.
Obviously, I get the New York thing. How did one of your children wind up in Newfoundland?
Good pronunciation there, I have to say. You do better than I do. I'm always like Newfoundland, and it's Newfoundland. Yeah, it is. He was going to school here. It didn't really suit him too well, so he went to a semester school up in Maine called Chewonki, which was like you could get rid of your phone and live in the woods for 4 months and study natural sciences. He got more into that realm, into like living in isolation in the woods with like-minded individuals, and then he started researching schools. He started to hone in on folklore as a study. He found one of 5 universities in the world that have an undergrad degree in folklore, and that's Memorial University up in St. John's. He applied to it, never went there to look at it because it's so far away, but he applied to it, got in, and was like, yeah, that's where I'm going. And so I took him up there, and it's great. He's had a great time up there, and immediately met some really amazing people. And I've been up there 3 times, like dicking around the country, like with my son Truett, which it's his birthday today. Happy birthday, Truett! And then with my brother, we went up for a couple weeks and dicked around, and then the whole family went up this last June and did the whole like whales and iceberg things, and went out and did tons of hiking and traveling around. So yeah, we love it up there. May have made some really good friends, and it's absolutely beautiful.
I've been in New York for about 20 years. I'm from California originally. I've been out here for about 20 years, and I'm like hitting that point in my life where I'm very seriously considering, not quite, rural Canada, but, maybe moving a little bit outside of the city. What's kept you in the DC area this long?
That's a good question. My wife was out in school in Seattle in the early 90s, and so I was out there with her for a few years, and I sort of seriously thought about putting roots down there and like raising our kids out there or having kids out there. We didn't have kids yet, but because my parents were out there. My family's from the West Coast. They're from all my older brothers and sisters were born in Berkeley, and so they're all
I'm from.
Yeah, so both sides of my family. Well, my dad's side of the family, the Cantys, are all from like since 1867. We're living in San Francisco, and my grandmother, who was born in 1889, was 16 in the San Francisco earthquake, living in the Mission with her however many brothers and sisters. I think it's 11.
In 1906?
1906, yeah, that's my grandma. was 16 in 1906. So anyways, they were all out there. And then my mother's family were in Seattle and Spokane and Montana. And then she ended up going to college down there, and her mother moved with her from Billings, Montana. And then they all ended up in DC just for, probably 18 years or so, and then split and went back west, but I stayed. I don't know. It kind of suits me. It's all I've ever known. I grew up here. My kids are going to the same schools I went to. There was something about like putting roots down in a place that you already had roots, It's been interesting. I don't always love it because you're driving by the house you grew up in, all the time, and everything is so familiar. But the kids have loved growing up here for the same reason I loved growing up here, just like the same stuff. Like it's easy to get around. It's a lovely city. There's all the clubs are all ages clubs. This really thriving music scene. They all play music. They all they take advantage of it in the same way that we did. And they love the schools. The schools have all been really great. So I love staying here just because we've got a great bookstore down the street that and I know the crossing guard's name, and the guy in the corner will fix my car after hours for cash, for cheap, and he's like, I just know it's like basically all the beautiful things about living in a city that take time to establish. And then you're like, it's like Mr. Rogers. It's like, these are the people in your neighborhood, and you just get used to them. So it does get a little old, walking the same walk, all the time. But at the same time, I leave a lot. I feel like, because I book, I'm on the road half the year on a good year, and less than that gets a little taxing. But I like to leave and come home to my home, and DC is definitely my home.
Growing up and coming of age in DC at the time that you did, obviously culturally and musically was such a unique scene. I'm wondering, being in Seattle in that period in the early 90s, was it comparable at all when you were out there?
When I was out, you mean in terms of like, did
in terms of music and cultural exchange?
Seattle was such a much more like internationally exploding scene than when I was growing up. It was like, I was in high school and it was like, okay, well, I know music pretty well at this point, and I know that the Bad Brains are the best band on the planet, and I know that Minor Threat's really great, and I know, like, to me, DC was making the best music in the world because just because I felt that way because it was I liked fast, really accomplished, fast, weird music. So, I felt like that about some of Seattle, but the Seattle thing was so, like, people at the same time were just moving there, like, including myself. I went there because my wife went there, but I remember the people at Sub Pop, I had friends working at Sub Pop, they're like, we're just going to tell people that, it's what they called the lesser Seattle movement, where they would just like tell people that it was shitty. You don't want to move here. There's people jumping off the Space Needle and killing themselves.
Olympia.
Yeah. And then the other truth of it all was that I felt like the real scene was down in Olympia. Like, to me, like that was to me a much cooler scene. I knew some of the people in the Seattle scene, and I knew some people who lived in Seattle, but most of my friends were down in Olympia. And on the weekends, we would go to Olympia when we could and hang out with everybody down there, Lois and Calvin and all those guys. And then even like Kurt, like he spent a lot of time down at Olympia too. But so I guess if you want to lump it all together, I would say that sort of felt like it, because Olympia kind of felt like it, it felt like a home, like a very homespun scene. They liked making pies. That's what I remember about them. No, I'm still friends. I'm still friends with a lot of those people. I mean, I still adore, like, Lois and I still talk a lot. Nikki McClure, Calvin, everybody's kind of still around there, And my sister and brother both went to Evergreen. So we would go out and stay at my sister's we would, like Fugazi, when we went out there, we'd stay for days at my sister's cabin. She had this cabin with no running water out near Tolmie State Park, exit 111. And we would stay with her. And go kayaking and hang out. And then, so yeah, Olympia was sort of always our central base.
I can relate, being from the Bay Area, I think is probably more comparable to the Seattle situation where, anytime I go home, it just does, it feels dramatically different. And probably for similar reasons as Seattle, all the tech money and everything coming in, that it felt like a place that I couldn't stay.
I know. I think a lot of towns feel like that. I think DC feels like that to my children. I just like, it's way too expensive at this point. Like when we were first starting, this story's everywhere. But when we bought this house 27 years ago for $250,000, and it's like, whatever. Now you have to add $1 million to that to just even get in here. And no places had a harder time of it than San Francisco. I know so many people who, just feel totally bewildered by the fact that they had to move out of their perfect city, which it really was for so long. I mean, it was really a lovely, lovely place to live. You know what? It's still a lovely place to live, but yeah.
It's still one of the great cities and one of the most beautiful cities in the world, but it's hard. The wealth discrepancy there, and some of the richest and some of the poorest people in the country living right next to each other. Like, God, there's something very clearly wrong going on out there. Yeah,
I mean, DC has that discrepancy as well. It's an extremely segregated city. I mean, it's less so. Well, it's less so now, but there's just mostly because white people are moving into all the black neighborhoods.
Gentrification is making it less segregated.
Less segregated. So take that as you will. But it's anyways, I think this story is happening like almost everywhere except for maybe Baltimore, which is like doesn't seem to change all that much.
I get the sense, sort of, listening to you talk about the formative music of your childhood, that a lot of it was really, I mean, obviously it was informed by your father being a jazz, being interested in jazz, but also going to a predominantly black high school and really being immersed in like the soul music of the period.
Yeah, well, I mean, the soul music was the popular music of the period. I mean, it was like basically like, Funkadelic, and Parliament was on the radio. I mean, it was, they were having hits. It wasn't like hard. It wasn't hard to find, it was what they were playing at the dances. So, but yeah. I mean, I feel incredibly grateful to have gone to a predominantly black school and, in high school, and just because you end up in an incredibly segregated world, it's like, and I feel really blessed to have at least had a shot not to live a totally secluded life. Now that I'm stuck in my living room, I'm not really stuck in my living room, but
I was lucky growing up in the Bay Area for, similar reasons. And it's something that I think about a lot in terms of politics now, in terms of like really sort of a lot of this like anti-trans legislation that's been happening, of just you hear about all of these politicians who are staunchly against a group of people until one of those people is in their life for some reason. Yeah. And once they actually,
it turns out it's their daughter. That happens. It only happens about 100% of the time.
Yeah, right. Like Dick Cheney famously was a lot more soft on LGBTQ rights than other Republicans because he had a gay daughter, and it's just like, yeah, maybe if more people lived with more different kinds of people, maybe we might be a little bit better as a society.
or they heard different stories, on television or or books. I mean, that really is that. I mean, that's why people, people fight diversity initiatives all the time, and I'm like, yeah, but man, dude, they work.
Are you talking about the woke mind virus?
Yeah. There's just it's you just see everybody from Morrissey to whoever just exactly. They're like, of course, I'm not talking about being woke or whatever, but really, it's like if we just could, and I think it's happening. I mean, I think we're getting more and more stories into our lives that are from more diverse places, and it's changing the way that people are it's starting to change for sure.
If you take somebody like John Lydon, who it just strikes me that it's possible to learn all of the wrong lessons from punk.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's you could talk to people who are like, Trump's totally punk. I'm like, what are you talking?
Oh, you mean he's just an asshole? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But if you can be like a Kanye level or John Lydon level provocateur, and it'll only get you so far. I mean, there's really at some point you just you got to shut the fuck up.
I think about this a lot as I get older, having listened to a lot of punk, and I guess for me, a big part of getting older and growing up and maturing is re-examining. I'm doing therapy talk as I'm in I started going to therapy in COVID, but examining what they call core beliefs in therapy. These things that you have held on too tightly and never re-examined. And I think that I think that for all of the sort of beautiful, wonderful things about punk, specifically, that people can get too tripped up in these ideals that they had and never really examined for any reason.
I mean, I kind of feel like it's like you got to keep them around like a book you love, and you got to reread them. Like you're saying, you got to re-examine them, but you got to reread your favorite book every once in a while and see how it resonates with you at that point. Because you do go through things every day. You're hopefully you're living a life where you're challenged every day, and you're able to challenge yourself every day. And in that way, you change. You turn into a different person, and throughout life, and eventually you can go back and look at find the little pencil mark on the wall and see how high you've grown. Basically, see if you've changed at all. I don't know. To me, it's like those kind of things. Rereading Kurt Vonnegut or rereading anything is it shows me what my biases used to be and what they are, and sort of where I am now in that way. You definitely like, I used to think that this book was about this, and also as you get older, you just forget all of these things, and you forget the nuances, and it's really easy to forget because the world will tell you, in terms of the punk rock stuff, the world will tell you what it thinks all that was about. Like, oh yeah, you stood this close to Kurt Cobain for 5 minutes, and that was your entire life, right? Or whatever it was, like there's these things that get distilled, like these collective memory moments that get distilled into this, like these, the farther we get away from the reality of it, the more the story just gets easier to tell, honestly, because it's not true.
And we play a role in that, whether consciously or subconsciously, where you tell a story enough times, you figure out which beats work, and then the story kind of starts to transform itself.
Yeah, and then you realize you're telling your brother's story. You're right. I mean, then it's like, you're like, oh shit, that happened to James, not me at all, or whatever, or Ian or something, and I'm like, well, which one of these is my story? And then you have to kind of go back and really do that work of trying to remember your story, even though it's not a really great, even doesn't tell as well as the other ones. You know, I think that that's probably the best part of therapy, really, is that you can sort of start taking ownership over your actual memories and stop, you know, kind of, I don't know, kind of, it's really easy to lie to yourself about your entire life. You know?
Yeah.
I'm trying not to do that. I try not to do that as much as possible. But really, you know, what helps that mostly is maintaining some level of like challenge, like what I was saying earlier, like actually going out there and like actually doing things that don't feel comfortable, and don't go back and sing the hits, you know, try to push yourself into different realms as much as possible.
Do you have a sense in which that is like a big part of the reason why, I mean, sorry to even broach the subject, but why like Fugazi is this thing that's in a lot of ways better left in the past and that you're not playing Coachella this year?
It's 100%. Yeah. 100%. Like as soon as, like, if you really treat it, like I can treat Fugazi the way that it's, I don't know. There's two sides of it. There's our relationship together as a band is actually as strong as ever. I mean, I still play with Joe all the time. I talk to Guy all the time. I talk to Ian and work with Ian all the time on different projects and things. So I honestly, like, going back and like trying to reapproach Fugazi seems like just almost like it would threaten what I have, the good thing I've got going with all three of those guys. You know, like we're all still such pals that I just think going back, it's like, I just don't know. And it also, it's like, it's really nicely, Fugazi's really nicely bookended, you know, like we did it the way we wanted to do it. And we did it consistently that way all through our career. And we put out all records we were super proud of, and when we thought they were done, and there was no knockdown, drag out, fuck you moment. You know, it was just life. You know, life was taking over. Like people's parents were dying, people's kids were being born, and it was like, we can't do this the same way. And it felt like that at the time. And so it's like, okay, well, let's take a break. And now the break has lasted 22 years. But like I say, it's like, it does feel like in this world, like I see I'm really not being critical of people for doing this, because I understand, you know, why they do this, but everybody's going out and playing a record, you know, they play this 30-year-old, 20-year-old record. It's something I just don't, I mean, it's just, I don't know, as much as it's the only sad part about all that we can't do it is that I actually really love those songs. I really love the Fugazi songs, and I would really love them to have a life, you know, and that's the part of it that's a little problematic for me. So I don't know if there was a way possibly to do it for a week a year, I'd probably do it for sure. But I don't know if that's possible, because Fugazi never did it for a week a year. I mean, one of the things that I think drove us to stop working together is that we really only knew one way to do things, which was like 100% of the time practice 5 hours a day, you know, like write, you know, and just be a real band, be in each other's faces all the time, you know, and be writing all the time. So I don't know. It's a good question.
Not to be too crass about it, but like, yeah, I mean, if you all had enormous gambling debts, you know, it might be a different story, but it seems like everybody has done quite well for themselves after. So there isn't that like pragmatic push to do it.
Did I mention I have 4 children? So yeah, I think I have an enormous, what could be metaphorically termed an enormous gambling debt.
That's a good point. However, I don't know, you know, it seems like you figured out better, again, being super crass about it, better revenue streams than maybe being in a touring punk band.
That's true. I still tour all the time. I don't know. I still am trying to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up. But yeah, Yeah. No, we still tour plenty. Yeah, you're right. I also augment it with all sorts of video work and soundtrack work and stuff like that. I work all the time. So, on just different things. Try to fill up my calendar as much as possible. But, yeah.
And all of your kids ended up being musicians in some way or another?
3 out of 4.
Okay. That's pretty good.
In play. My daughter's. This is my daughter's band.
Yeah.
Girl. She's the one who's most, well, she's not the most active because Leo is in a band called Cleo Walks Through Glass. And then Ace is in a band called Young June. And I don't know. I just don't know to what extent they play all the time. But Mabel seems to be playing a whole lot.
She was opening for Mary Timony, who recently had on the show. So she's kind of keeping it in that whole DC family, too, which is beautiful.
Mary was her guitar teacher. So that it's like, but yes. I tour managed that tour up the East Coast with did you come to Mary's show at the Bowery Ballroom? Because Mabel played the Birthday Girl played that show. But yeah, they're playing with Bikini Kill in September. They're getting lots of really good opening slots. And Guided by Voices on June 7th. And I know they immediately getting asked to do like tons of like bigger shows, and they're like, we're 16 years old. Like we need to play like Comet Ping Pong and like the smaller gigs around town. We want to do that. They want to have their own scene too, But that's interesting because, and I wonder how much of it is, what's that band, the Linda Lindas, of just like people are really excited about just like girls, like young girls playing punk rock, and understandably. Oh, no. Yeah, not just punk rock. I mean, like Mabel's not playing. They're not necessarily a punk band. They write songs, I mean, not that punk rock. That sounds bad. No, but they're more of like a singer songwriter-y band than like a straight up punk band. But I think there's something really powerful going on, in general, just with like the freshness of like women, not just being, comfortable enough to like say what they want to say, speak, but and it's like, it's just so different than when we were young, where it's like, there was so much like criticism around women's rock music, and it just feels like people are much more accepting of, and it's really powerful to see that going on sort of universally.
It still exists, certainly, but I think there's now a more powerful voice on the other side, which is nice.
Yeah, and we don't hang out with people who criticize women's music, do we? I'd like to think we don't. We don't shake hands with those people.
It's an extra wrinkle to this that your father, was an accomplished musician, not a professional one. But in terms of, the level in which, you want to sort of foster your children's musical career and support them, but also be very practical about how big of a challenge it is and how hard of a road that is to go down.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You mean just in terms of life stuff, or you're talking about like, if you choose this life, you will be broke until you're 80.
Yeah, pretty much.
You'll be working 80 hours a week to earn less than anybody who works 40 hours. And you'll be dealing with tons of bullshit just to get up on stage for an hour every day. You'll have to schlep your gear.
However bad it was for me at the time, it only seems to be getting worse.
Yeah, but yeah. Yeah. I think the way I would encourage them is to compart, and I do say this. I mean, I was like, can't be, it's not necessarily, not even healthy for your art to try to get everything out of your art. Is to get your living and your creativity and your friendships and everything out of your music. Like, you have to be a diversified person in general, and not just like as a like falling, not just about like falling back on things, but just like, just in terms of like, don't kill the thing you love, right? I mean, you just like, lessen the load that your creativity needs to carry. That's all I'm saying. So it's like, if it feels like it's about to break or that there's too much, cause I think it happens a lot. I think people like, even if you get famous, if you have a great hit record, it's almost harder because you're
burn out.
Trying to keep people dancing on the dance floor, like when you're DJing, it's hard to keep everybody happy all the time. And it's hard to keep everybody supported. You can't support like people like, look, it's a band like Pearl Jam or something like that. There's a lot of mouths to feed in that organization, and there's a lot of responsibility, and they do it better than anybody. I mean, they really take care of everybody better than anybody. But can you imagine the pressure, the upward pressure on somebody, like Eddie or somebody who like has to, make decisions that
once you hit a certain level, you're expected to maintain that level.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, I think that's, just to my point, I just think that's a lot to ask of anybody. So I think everywhere, maybe it's good problems to have. I don't know, but it's, but to me, I try to like just maintain, and I think they see it in my life where it's like I have the band, but I also work, I also do other work, and it's like, and I also have my family life, I also love I love my family, I love my house, I love my neighborhood, but I love being on the road with people, I love my band so much right now, and we're having, great shows and put out a record that I'm really proud of, and it's like, all these things kind of have to complement each other. And if they don't complement each other, if one thing is is messing with the other thing, that's when the problem arises, so you just really work your ass off to make sure. Cause if I was out there going, like, and this happened at the end of Fugazi where we were going out a lot, and I had 3 very young kids. Now, none of my kids are young anymore, so that's probably another freeing aspect of the whole thing. But when they were young, and it's like you feel like you're drowning, it's like you can't split for a month and a half, like it's a bad form, so you just like basically. Anyway, so that's what I'm trying to impart to them is like that. I mean, I think I'm a pretty good spokesperson for that balance, for at least attempting a level of balance.
As you were saying, you can't depend on it for your life and your friendship, but like, looking at you, it seems like so much of your life has come out of music. I mean, you're talking about these still incredibly tight relationships that you had with these former and in some cases current bandmates that you knew when you were a teenager. So, certainly at the same time, music has also gifted you all of these different facets of life. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's great for that. I mean, it's great to bring you into, working with a band that actually that actually creates together, and like all that I love all that. I mean, but I think in Fugazi, there was a feeling though that it was like, I needed to do other things, I needed it really was going to snap. Like especially in Fugazi, because we'd spent so much of our time together, that it was, and that's something I don't think you want that, if you've been really close and really tight with people, and that you don't want it to fall apart. You want to stay in each other's lives. So to me, I think that was one of the things I was worried about in that band, but towards the end. And, but it's also like, I'm not saying like, don't commit yourself to something, because I think it's important to have some level of commitment and to have commitment in the band for sure. But, I just think that there's kind of two, it's like Charles Ives always worked at jobs, so he could so he could write the wackiest music he possibly could. And I think it's like you see it throughout life that the person who wrote his novels but was also a postman is sort of what I aspire to be than like let's just do session after session after session, and work on the road nonstop.
It seems to me a lot of people who are in a band like that, where things are so intense for so long, and it is such a defining part of your life, and during such a formative period, that it might be hard to come down from that. And you might have to almost go through the process of like rediscovering who you are as a person outside of the group.
Yeah, and it's also like you are also, as we said earlier in this conversation, you're constantly changing. I mean, you just are. I mean, right? You're meeting new people, you're reading new books, you're trying to get smarter, like all these things that are happening. And some of the sounds that you were making before don't serve you as well as they do now. Just aesthetically, like you're always looking for something else. You're always halfway up the hill. I felt like that in Fugazi, and I feel like it now. Like if you're not like out there, like at least trying to create and challenge yourself creatively, then there's not any point to doing it. But that's not just musically. That's just like that's in life itself. You have to really like maintain some level of terror in your life. If you will.
What was that period like, and how did you get in touch with?
You mean after Fugazi?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we got married, bought a house, and had a kid almost immediately, like all in 1 year in 97. By 2002, we had our third child on the way. Like I say, we were, Fugazi was having, it was taking longer and longer to write a record. It was taking less. We're not able to tour quite as much. And I just frankly needed to actually like work more, So I started doing some soundtracks for people and going out and doing, I wasn't doing film work at that point. I was just doing soundtrack for film at that point, for television, for documentaries and things like that. I was doing some audio work, mixing things and writing music for, oh man, I did everything. I mean, I was just doing whatever to make it work. And then, and my wife's father passed away very suddenly of a heart attack at 60, which was traumatic. And then 9/11 happened like a month later. And then, so things were feeling like really like vastly out of my control, and I felt like, this is something I really have to be home all the time for these kids, that was the main thing. And so that self-discovery happened, Fugazi played its last show in 2002 and over in London about this time of year, I think it was. And then it was just like it's just a process of like throwing myself into parenthood and trying to make something that looked like another life, another career in, doing music, doing soundtracks, doing films. Now, it's funny because within a couple of years, I was like out on the road with Bob Mould. Like I started playing with other people pretty quickly. But I did have to sort of teach myself like all of these, teach myself Pro Tools and teach myself, and I was teaching myself music theory already and playing piano a lot. And, when I was out in Seattle. So I was always trying to like develop this other side hustle as like, as a composer, which, really that primarily is what I did for years, doing like, prison shows and, whatever shows on National Geographic. And I didn't go out. Besides Bob Mould, I didn't really play out a ton. And I was at home kind of doing my thing basically with my family. Yeah. For years, really. So it wasn't, and then I, in 2013, had a band called Death Fix, which I started playing guitar and singing in because I was writing songs with my friend Rich Morell, and we played those out and put out a record, and then it kind of got me back into playing a little bit live, but then I didn't really start playing drums again, seriously, until I started playing with this guy, Doug Kallmeyer, and we just started playing in this thing called Super Silver Haze, which was just an instrumental and film thing live. And then once I started playing drums, I was like, I just started feeling much more comfortable, much more like happy to see an old friend and going out there. And then I met up with, and then Joe moved back, and Joe and I were just dicking around and ended up teaming up with Anthony, who I was a fan of because I'd been going to see him play in a lot of different iterations. And then that turned into the Messthetics in 2018. And then we've just been doing that as my primary outlet since then. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what that. No. Now we're all caught up in 15 years of
listening to you talk about being for this record, at least, is a jazz band, and you brought in a real like jazz guy to play jazz with you. That in and of itself has been one of those big challenges for you, is almost like keeping up with the guys.
You're keeping up with these guys. Yeah, they're fucking amazing players, Well, I mean, Anthony and James are incredible together. I mean, there's probably $150,000 worth of education in that guy's horn. He's like, no, but he's also just one of the greatest. We played with him multiple times up in New York. And it's funny because the writing process wasn't that different than anything else that we ever did, but it was, we always had his voice, his sound in our heads while we were writing this record. And so it kind of made it, it was just so much easier. The whole process was so much easier because it was sort of like getting he's somebody who can do anything. He's got a beautiful voice. He plays softly, beautiful. He can really wail his heart, and he's also like, we give him like really difficult music and he's right on top of it. So you see his music is very difficult. If you hear his quartets, like his new record, is incredibly complex. And so oddly enough, like once he got in the band, it was like, oh, this is the easiest thing on the planet. It was really like the record. We did the record in 2 days for $1,500 and just we never even mixed the record. It's just the rough mixes on the record. I was just like, oh, this sounds great. You happy? You happy? You happy? Okay, great. We're done. And then a friend at Impulse Records was like, hey, can I hear that? And we're like, yeah. And he's like, can we put it out? And we're like, of course. So it's like, I mean, there's never been an easier, for as challenging as I like to talk about it. It's really like, it's not the challenge of it, I think, is, trying to, get people to care about the instrumental music is hard, and that's, and bridging the gap between rock and jazz has been really hard, trying to get people like James is huge in the jazz world and not in the rock world, and vice versa. Like nobody gives a fuck about the Messthetics in the jazz world, necessarily, but we're trying to say like, but but that's part of the effort. That's part of the challenge for this whole record and for this collaboration. So for me, I feel like that's been a daily hard and interesting thing to deal with, is that the segregated world between jazz and rock. But that's okay. I'm happy to try. It's been the dialogue that happens around it is super interesting.
It seems like the people that you've gotten through to in the jazz world have been welcoming, though.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, I think, because I think it works. I mean, I'm proud of the record because I think it's. I mean, I love it. I love what he the way James has augmented the melodies that Anthony has written, or that any of us has written. We've all collaborated or contributed to the record, but Anthony has some very complicated pieces on the record, and that James threw himself into, and that it really elevates those things. And that happens even on the road. We're out on the road and throwing stuff out all the time. Like we have new songs and some old songs that we think would sound cool on, and his horn just makes everything sound amazing. It's a much more real voice, it just sounds more three-dimensional, with him on it. So, no, I've been really, and to your point, yes, people have been really receptive, and I don't want to, I'm not turning my nose up at the jazz world at all. They've been really, Downbeat gave us 4 stars. We were playing the Newport Jazz Festival. There's all these markers of success in the jazz world that we've just crossed over this week, So, I mean, and Pitchfork likes it. So
that is a rare triple crown.
Yeah, exactly. Is Pitchfork Belmont?
I think Pitchfork would like to think so.
Anyways, yeah, it's been a great. This has been these shows that we played are my favorite shows I've played in since Fugazi. It's been fucking fantastic. I love being on stage with these guys, and a lot of it is because I feel like I can just be the drummer, I have to fully emotionally and artistically support these guys and be a utility player in this way. I mean, I can respond to what they're throwing down, and I can sit there and enjoy the fact that they're racing ahead. As another racehorse metaphor, when you put 2 horses side by side, they will race each other, and these guys have been doing that every night. I've been so happy.